FM News Talk 97.1.
On-demand audio.
The other big story that we have been following is the battle of Obamacare via the states. And I said the day after the election that this needs to be a renewed focus amongst not just, grassroots, but conservatives, Republicans as a whole, because Obamacare is still vulnerable. And that's what Michael Cannon wrote about. He's the director of health policy studies at the Cato Institute and the co-editor of Replacing Obamacare. He has a piece up at thenationalreview.com, which really, this has been passed around so much. This is a great article, and it discusses point by point all of the vulnerabilities of Obamacare. And Michael joins us this afternoon by phone. Michael, good afternoon to you.
How are you, Dana? I
am doing well. I love your perspective on this. And this is something in the state of Missouri, not just Missouri, but Indiana, where we're also heard, in other states. We've been seeing a huge battle about this between the states and Obamacare. 14 different some odd states have either passed referendums, resolutions. Ohio amended its state constitution to reject Obamacare. Explain a little bit how really this could still be a successful fight.
Well, ever since President Obama won re-election, supporters of Obamacare have been crowing that the law is now settled law, that it's going to take effect and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But in fact, the way they wrote the law gives states the power to block half of its new entitlement spending. All they have to do is not implement the health insurance exchanges that the law asks them to create. It's not a mandate. And if they refuse to create an exchange, not only can they block that entitlement spending, but they can block the taxes that Obamacare would impose in their states. They can block the employer mandate, which can impose a tax of $2,000 per worker on employers. They can block the individual mandate, which can impose a tax of $2,000 on a family of four making as little as $24,000 a year. And so a lot of states, for these reasons and more, have been saying, no, we're not going to create exchanges. Mm-hmm. But then it goes even farther than that, because when the Supreme Court struck down the mandate that in the law that said that every state has to expand their Medicaid program or else lose all federal Medicaid funding, when the Supreme Court struck down the mandate part of that Medicaid expansion and made that Medicaid expansion optional, it gave states the ability to block the other half of Obamacare's entitlement spending. So if states all of them decline to implement these parts of the law, they could bring down they could reduce federal deficits by $1.6 trillion over the next 10 years. But you don't even need that many states to cripple this law and force Congress to reopen it. All you need is a critical mass of states that are saying no to it, and Congress will have to reopen this.
And we're kind of approaching that point right now.
I think that's right. We've already got a dozen or 15 states that they're not going to create exchanges. The numbers on the Medicaid expansion are kind of fuzzy. But as you mentioned, 14 states have either amended their constitutions or passed statutes that prohibit their state employees from operating a health insurance exchange. And as more states learn about this and the ramifications of creating an exchange and the benefits of not creating one, I think more of them are going to end up in the not creating an exchange column, and it's for reasons like this.
Right.
If Missouri declines to create a health insurance exchange, then it can exempt 309,000 of its residents from the individual mandate. That's the one that imposes a tax of $2,000 on families of four making as little as $24,000 a year. In Indiana, where I understand the incoming governor, Mike Pence, is doing the right thing and not creating an exchange, he's going to exempt 291,000 Indiana residents from the individual mandate, in addition to exempting the employers in both states from the employer mandate.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and it sounds, when you put it in those terms, it sounds so simple. And as I was scratching my head all last week, I had a conversation, I guess if you could call it a conversation, with a state representative here who thinks that, the last best hope that the state of Missouri has for any sort of input into Obamacare is if we just go ahead and do as Obamacare says and implement the state exchange, and we'll work with the federal government because at least we'll have some control there. But, as I was speaking with, another state senator, that's just sort of the appearance of control. There is actually, there's no state control in these exchanges.
Well, that's absolutely right. If you look at the statute, it makes it clear that the Secretary of Health and Human Services will be running these exchanges. Let me give you 3 reasons why. The law empowers the Secretary of Health and Human Services to impose on even state-created exchanges, never mind the ones that she's supposed to create if the state doesn't create one, but even on state-created exchanges, quote, such requirements as the Secretary determines appropriate. So she can make them do whatever they want. The law also provides, quote, that states that create their own exchanges, quote, may not establish rules that conflict with or prevent the application of regulations promulgated by the Secretary. So states, she can put whatever regulations she wants on state-created exchanges. States can't do anything to stop them. And finally, they give the Secretary the authority to approve or disapprove a state-created exchange. So if a state does not comply with all the Secretary's requirements, she can sweep that exchange aside and put her own exchange in place. The idea that, we'll create it because right now the Secretary is letting us do this, make this one little decision right here, that's not really control, because the Secretary can take that away as soon as you've committed and done the heavy lifting that she herself can't do because she doesn't have funding for it, and you have cemented in place the very federal takeover that you were trying to avoid.
Exactly.
If you want an illustration of the kind of control the Secretary knows she has over these state-created exchanges, remember in 2010. Insurance companies started telling their enrollers how much Obamacare, or their enrollees, how much Obamacare was increasing their premiums. And Secretary of Health and Human Services Kathleen Sebelius responded with a threat. She wrote to the insurance companies, quote, simply stated, we will not stand idly by as insurers blame their premium hikes and increase profits on the requirement that they provide consumers with basic protection. So stop telling your enrollees that it's Obamacare that's increasing their premiums. And she threatened them that if they didn't, she would exclude them from the exchanges. Now, she didn't say, I will exclude you from the federal exchanges because they're the only ones I have any control over. She said, we're going to exclude you from the exchanges. That means the state-created exchanges, too, because she controls them. There's no state control here.
Right. Well, and that's something that we had Missouri State Representative Jay Barnes was trying to argue, and by trying to argue, I mean yell, that the states, they absolutely do have some control. They get to determine the level of the government-imposed mandates, and they get to determine the sorts of plans that are available for purchase in state. Now, having read, the law and the statute, that's not what I get out of it at all.
That's absolutely incorrect. It is true that the Secretary of Health and Human Services has asked states to define this benchmark plan that will determine how much coverage everyone in their state has to purchase. The only flexibility that gives states is the flexibility to make Obamacare even worse than the Secretary herself would make it. It does not give states the ability to exempt their employers from, say, the contraceptives mandate that so many religious employers and secular employers who have deeply held religious convictions are challenging in federal court. The state of Missouri will have no power to stop that mandate if it creates its own exchange. The only way the state can protect the conscience rights of those employers is if it refuses to create an exchange and thereby blocks the employer mandate, blocks the individual mandate for those hundreds of thousands of residents, so that even if the lawsuits that are trying to challenge that contraceptives mandate fail, then those religious will have an option of not providing health insurance to their workers or not buying health insurance themselves, so that they will not have to be violating their conscience.
Yeah,
it's not the sort of religious protection for religious freedom or freedom of conscience that those people are due, or that a free society should aspire to. But it is at least something, and the only thing that a state can do, and the state does that by refusing to create an exchange.
Yes, and I'm hoping what all of these states, especially when we have, 30 governorships now across the country, and 14, 15 states that have absolutely rejected. Missouri rejected it twice. I'm hoping that that's what we move towards, and I'm hoping that Republicans don't get all squishy on this. So Michael Cannon, excellent piece and excellent analysis on all of this. I so appreciate your perspective on this. Thank you for being a voice.
Anytime. See you, Dan.
Thanks so much. Take care.